Okay, welcome back to Module 4. This is part 2 of our video instruction. I want to dig into what the present level of performance is. Okay, this is an important piece of the IEP that really drives what we do. You can't know how you're going to make progress unless you know what the student already knows, right? We've got to have that baseline of performance, and we've got to really have, especially as we're bringing a student into special education services, we're identifying them with a disability, we have to have a really, really clear picture of what they're able to do, because that's going to guide how we develop our goals. That's going to guide how the expectations we have in terms of progress that the student's going to make. So this is really important. So during the initial IEP, where we're going through this evaluation process, there are a number of tools that we use to develop this picture of what the student is able to do. Okay, we have things like achievement tests, which we'll take a look at. We pull state assessment information in from past performances if it's available. Curriculum-based measurements are a great tool to provide us with a really clear picture of what the student's able to do that then we can tie into progress monitoring. So we're going to take a look at that. There's some inventories and some functional behavior assessment and behavior ratings that we will want to pull in. And then some adaptive behavior scales where we're looking at functional skills, okay, independence, being able to take care of things for themselves, age-appropriate skills like using the restroom, buttoning a shirt, tying their shoes, different things related to PT and OT that we can pull out of those adaptive behavior skills also. So let's take a look at these. When we talk about achievement tests, those are typically criterion referenced achievement tests, and they talk about this in the book. There's a couple that we can pull from that you will become more familiar with as you take your assessment class here at Pitt State. The two common ones that we see are the Woodcock-Johnson test of achievement and the Weschler individual achievement test. Okay, these are the two most common that we see, and they are norm referenced with peers, so we're able to get a good idea of how they perform compared to their peers on these tests. And I don't want to go into a lot of detail on those because that is something that you're going to learn a lot more about in your assessment class, and there's a lot of information that could be pulled from that. But the key principle I want you to take away from this is really thinking about the different tools that we use to paint that real clear picture of what the student is able to do. Okay. The other important tool is curriculum-based measurements, CBMs. There are a lot of free resources out there that you can use to access curriculum-based measurements that are already developed for you. I included a couple links in the module information if you need access to those. These are typically either a timed sample or some kind of probed assessment that we're giving students. So for example, in a reading passage that they would do for a CBM, they might do a read aloud where you're identifying errors in their reading over a timed reading. And then they might also read a passage and do a maze activity where it has words pulled out, vocabulary words pulled out from that passage, and they're going back and plugging in what they remember. Okay. And then in math, it would be computational questions, typically, that are grade level appropriate. Okay. Easy CBM website is one that a lot of districts use. You can use parts of it freely. You don't have to pay for it. And then there's a piece of it that is a paid piece that allows you to do a little bit more tracking and some things like that. But it is a really, really solid resource for accessing curriculum-based measurements that are already developed, that have the probes there for you. You can print them off. You can give them to a student. It also has some great ways of just tracking that data for you, which is really helpful. The reason I like CBMs is because, for example, on Easy CBM, they have quarterly CBMs that you can give, for example, in math, that are a really quick way of evaluating for those quarterly IEP reports where the student is performing. The probes are already made for you. You're able to compare it to where they should be on compared to their peers easily. And it's really easy to document progress with those CBMs. And they're short and sweet, so it doesn't take a lot of time for the student to take the assessment, but it's giving you some really good solid information on how they're performing. The other thing that we want to do in the present level of performance is not only provide a clear picture on academic skills, but we also want to provide a clear picture on functional skills. So we need to look at some tools for evaluating kind of those everyday skills, social skills, behavioral skills, independence. Like I said, being able to take care of, the things that they need to take care of in the classroom independently. And so we can kind of do this a couple ways. We can do this through observation. There are a number of inventories out there that we can use. And there are some behavioral rating scales that we can use that are really helpful. The BERS 2, the Behavioral and Emotional Rating Scale, is one of the most popular tools to use. It's really a reliable scale. And the reason I like it, it has a simple scale that you can complete as a parent, a teacher, and as the student. And so you can kind of take all three of those scales, combine them, and see if there's some common patterns in areas where the student may be struggling. And then there's some adaptive behavior scales that we can look at that look at social skills and life skills. I will say, as you look at these scales and you're doing a scale maybe with the parent filling one out, and the teacher and the student, you may see some pretty big discrepancies between what the parent identifies as areas maybe of concern compared to the teacher. And we have experienced this with Josie as we've filled out these scales. And what we have really determined is, school is a pretty structured environment. And so the teacher may see Josie as a little bit more independent at school because it's so structured and predictable for her at school. And what we observe at home, just in daily living, where, things could be different every day. You go to lots of different environments. The structure is very different. Even though we have a lot of routine in our house, and we're probably really heavy on routine compared to most homes, there is still a lot of flexibility that she has to have in her daily life at home compared to at school. So what we find is our rating scales typically, we typically rate her lower than the classroom teacher. And so I think when we initially saw that, I thought, gosh, am I just being hard on her? And I've got experience in this, but that was my initial inclination was, I'm judging her skills a little too harshly. And, the school psych jumped right in and said, you guys are living in an environment that is not as structured as school. And so you're going to see her struggle with some of those skills compared to what we see at school. So I think that's helpful to just point out to parents if you're seeing that difference in the rating scales. Okay, so now we've done all this testing, right? We've got all this information, and we've got to communicate this in a document called the Individual Education Plan, the IEP, okay? Communicating that present level of performance. And we do this for two purposes, and I think this is so important. And I feel passionate about this because not only are we going to identify the areas of need, the areas of delay in that present level of performance, but we're identifying areas of strength too. And I think that's so important because we want to build on the student's strengths. We want to build on those areas where they are being successful and use that to help beef up those areas of need, okay? So it's really important as we're completing that present level of performance that it's not just full of the areas where the student is behind, where they're struggling, okay? That we're really using those assessment tools to identify and paint that picture of where their strengths are too. And the parents need to hear this. They need to hear those areas of strength also. It can be overwhelming to get that present level of performance in front of you and just see all these areas where they're lagging behind and they're struggling, okay? So really make sure that you're putting as much emphasis on those strengths as you are the needs, okay? And then we've got the present level of performance. Now we're going to use that to identify measurable annual goals. So every year we're going to develop new goals related specifically to those areas of need. So any place in the present level of performance where we've identified an area of need, say an academic area, okay, we need to address that with an annual goal. In those functional skills, if we've identified an area of need, we need to address those with a goal or with some kind of supplementary aid or service to address that functional skill. And we'll take a look at some real specific examples of what those supplementary aids and services look like here in a minute. So I want to give you an example of a couple different measurable annual goals, okay? So I've got one for behavior and one for academics, okay? So here's one for academics. We're talking about an annual goal. So by February of 2022, Josie will be able to read a story within her ZPD, which is her independent reading level, and complete a story elements graphic organizer, including setting, characters, and plot with 80% accuracy. So the team developed this goal for Josie because one of the things that she struggles with is comprehension, and we wanted to build in the tool and the support into the IEP goal to ensure that it was being used consistently in the classroom and that Josie was learning how to use a strategy to support her comprehension. So that's why you see the use of the graphic organizer built right into the goal, okay? And this has really helped ensure that no matter what she is reading, whether it's in a small group or a large group, which building she's in, since she's doing dual placement and getting reading instruction in both, she's getting this common use of a graphic organizer across all those settings, which is really critical for her to learn how to use it. And we know that graphic organizers are such a good tool for improving reading comprehension, okay, helping students identify those things and get used to that pattern of looking back at their story and identifying those story elements. And so that was really important for us as a team. We felt like to build that into her goal. Okay, the second goal that we have here is for a behavior. So when given an assignment, student will demonstrate on-task behavior by sitting quietly at his seat, looking at his materials, and performing the task for 15 out of 20 minutes on 4 out of 5 trials. So you can see in this goal, there's a couple things that are going to guide how we're doing this. We've got the expectation, right? Sitting quietly in a seat, looking at the materials, performing the task. And then it gives us information on how we are going to track it. So we're going to be doing some observation, and maybe it's just the classroom teacher checking off periodically over a 20-minute period if he's staying on task or not, okay? And we're going to do that in 4 out of 5 trials. So we wouldn't look at this goal and say, in 8 weeks, we're going to do one observation to see if he's meeting the goal. No, we're going to actually do 5 at some point over the course of the next 8 weeks to see if he is performing the task. And so we're not just basing our progress monitoring on a one-shot look at or observation of the behavior, okay? Now, when we talk about these goals, we have to identify how frequently we are going to monitor them and how we're going to report that progress to parents, okay? And I have a short 2-page article I want you to read, might be 3 pages, in the module called Monitoring Student Progress Towards Meeting IEP Goals. That's really helpful, helps you look at how to track that, how to report it to parents, and then really how to look at the data in terms of if the student is not making gains, what do we do? If they're making gains rapidly, what do we do? So we need to think about that, right? We're not always going to have a student just follow a red trend line and make the appropriate progress on each IEP goal. There are going to be times where we do progress monitoring and we say, whoa, we're not making progress here. What's going on? We need to try something different. Maybe we try something different for a little bit, We go back and do another quick assessment, maybe a curriculum-based measurement. We say, hey, we're still not making progress here. Something's going on with this goal. The goal that we developed may not be appropriate, or our expectation on progress may not be appropriate, and we need to change it. And we can do that during the year, okay? So we progress monitor typically quarterly, and we report that progress to parents quarterly. So parents, in most schools, you're getting a grade card of some sort, right, at the end of the quarter. You're also getting a report on your IEP goals and how the student is meeting those goals, whether they're meeting it or not, okay? And then, now that we've got the goals developed, now we've got to think about, okay, what are we going to do to help the student make progress and meet those goals? What does their specially designed instruction look like? What kind of services are we going to be providing? What kind of supplementary aids do we need? Okay, so I think it's so important to remember when we're thinking about specially designed instruction, we're not talking about a place or a person, okay? It doesn't always necessarily mean the special ed teacher in the resource room, right? We've got to really kind of think outside the box on what the student needs, what our resources are in the building, and what that's going to look like. Even thinking about what kind of groups that we already have that exist in the building, other kinds of resources in the building, whether it's a reading specialist or how we use our paraprofessionals, all of that. We look at what kind of specially designed instruction that student's going to need. And then we also need to look at related services. So for example, maybe the student needs speech services, or as we were looking at the functional skills, maybe we noticed some fine motor delays and we need to work with an occupational therapist. Those are all things that we would include in the IEP as we start talking about services and we start looking at making the connection between the goals, how we're going to meet those goals with the services we provide. And then we can look at adding supplementary aids and services. And these can be a number of things. There's some great examples in the textbook on supplementary aids and services. For example, using universal design for learning would be an example of a supplementary aid and service that we could list in the IEP. If you want to take a look at those, they're on page 114. Figure 4.6. Maybe we have some seating arrangement things that we need to document in the IEP. Maybe they need to be seated close to the front of the class, or they need to have some space away from them and their peers to be able to focus. Those are things we could identify. Maybe we need assistive technology. We need to use a calculator, or they need to use a communication device. That would be considered a supplementary aid and service. The use of a para or peer support is considered supplementary aids and services. So for example, Josie has a one-on-one para because of her health needs. That's listed in her IEP underneath supplementary aids and services, okay? So lots of different things can go in there. It's really important for us to really think about and as a team talk about what kinds of aids and services do we need to ensure the student has access to. Because if it's not documented, it doesn't always mean it's going to happen. We really want to make sure we're documenting it in the IEP. Let's say you've got a student that moves in December. That IEP that you've developed for them, they're taking to the new district, and that's what they have to implement. So if the student's used to maybe having peer support or a para in the classroom, and it's not listed in that document, it's not in the IEP, when they move, the likelihood of that school knowing that they need that is pretty slim. So we want to make sure that it is a very thorough document in terms of what we're providing in the classroom. And then some additional things that we include in the IEP, and the text talks about this. Accommodations for testing, we always have to identify those for the state assessment in terms of testing or alternative assessment, whichever the student is going to take. We list the frequency, location, and duration of services and accommodations, okay? So for example, our youngest Bo, he's still receiving speech, okay? So he has in his IEP 30 minutes, one time a week, speech services. okay, in pull-out. So that means it's in the speech classroom. He comes out of the kindergarten classroom to do that, okay? That's a real simple example of how we would identify frequency, location, and duration of services. Now, we include transition services after the student turns 16. And then we also have any kind of special factors in there. So if we have a student that has a behavior plan, we include that in the IEP. If they have language needs, we include that. Sometimes, and we'll take a look at students who fall under the category of other health impaired. They may have a health plan that we include in the IEP. It might be for seizures or some health need that they have that needs to be documented with the school nurse. So those are all special factors that from time to time you're going to have a student have that as a piece of their IEP. Okay? So this is kind of IEP in a nutshell. Really what I'm talking about today in the instructional videos are just the critical pieces I want to make sure you walk away from when you finish this module. But please make sure you take a close look at the text. It's got some great information in there on the components of the IEP, how it's developed. Take a look at the additional reading and the resources in terms of assessment tools that are out there. I think you'll find them very helpful to you. And if you have any questions at all about IEPs that you're working on in the classroom, IEP experiences that you've had, please don't hesitate to reach out. That's what I'm here to do, is to help you work through that. Many of you are working through your first experiences with IEPs, or you're a general ed classroom teacher and you've set maybe in on a few IEP meetings, but you're not as familiar with the process. Shoot me an email. Let me know what questions you have, and I'd be glad to answer them.